In the talk today, we're going to share some thoughts and ideas about a new movement that is developing in our country, a movement that is beginning to answer a lot of questions about dysfunctional families. The movement has been titled Adult Children of Alcoholics. But in the talk today, what I'd like to do is change that a little bit and develop my talk around dysfunctional families. For I feel that the principles and the concepts of this disease affect all families that are dysfunctional. And in looking at this disease, we can then begin to look at the recovery process for it. It's interesting, but it begins to answer a lot of questions. Unfortunately, what happens a lot of times is that people begin to look at their sense of being dysfunctional and look at it in a negative way. We have to learn that if we really look at the principles I'm going to share with you today, then almost the majority of us are dysfunctional. And maybe that's okay, because it teaches us that from the sense of being dysfunctional, we develop a positive concept of being functional. And so we have to learn recovery and the recovery process and not get stuck in being in the old ways that we were. Unfortunately, also, very many of the principles I want to share with you today are principles that were tried and true for years, that people just accepted. The old phrase of grin and bear it and just kind of survive. For adult children are survivors. There are people that just survive and live life and then die. And it's sad. So when we talk about the adult child of the dysfunctional family, we're talking about an individual who is an adult physically, but as far as the emotional and spiritual aspect of the individual, they are children. They have developed in their lives norms, things that they consider to be normal, that were based and set up in them at the time they were little children. And yet in becoming adults, they still function and operate under the norms of their childhood. So in reality, what has happened to most of us as adult children is we basically never grew up. We spent our life living as little boys and little girls and just functioning in our adult world, being a little boy and a little girl. As a result, we basically developed our lives around a fantasy and around a fairy tale and not around reality. Recovery means to get in touch with reality, and recovery means to develop a good sense of reality. So now let me take a few minutes and explain the concept of this disease and how it works. Again, whenever I talk about the disease of addiction or any area of addiction, especially this area of the adult child, we talk about it from three perspectives: the physical, the emotional, and the spiritual. Anything that is dysfunctional in our life attacks us in all three ways. For the adult child is attacked in these three ways because this child normally comes from a home that did not function in a normal, positive way, in a home that did not have a good physical, emotional, and spiritual foundation. And so as a result, everything this child did was to learn systems that developed something for them that was negative. It means growing up in a negative lifestyle and then thinking that lifestyle is normal and never realizing your potential, your beauty, and the positive person within. Very many of these children come from alcoholic and drug-addicted families, but many more of them come from families that simply operate in areas of all types of dysfunctionality. Very many of these families are people that appear on the surface to be happily married, to be pillars of the community, to be working in very positive ways externally. But what we have to look at is the internal and what happens to people in the internal. So again, what I would like to do in this talk is begin by defining the concept of addiction for the adult child as it is for all people in addiction. The concept of addiction I define is that an addicted person is anyone who lives in fear, guilt, or dependency. In taking that definition and applying it to the adult child is one who has grown up living around fear, developed a sense of guilt, and became dependent on the individuals, the circumstances, and the institutions that create that fear and create that guilt. As a result, the adult child, very basically, is a scared person, but the ironical part of it is they don't know they're scared and they don't know they're guilty. They just live in it as it becomes normal for them. So when we look at that definition, we realize the characteristics and the images an adult child takes on. The best way I love to describe this is to show you the concepts of the adult child. Remember, the adult child is a walking, living, functioning contradiction. By the concept of their name, they are an individual who is an adult, at the same time a child. So as a result, the name adult child is a walking contradiction. And yet their lifestyle becomes the exact same thing. There are people who seem to be externally okay. There are people who are survivors. There are people who function very well. But internally, there are people who are emotionally and spiritually somewhere around pre-adolescence. And as a result, there's no growth in their life. Their life is very empty. Their life is something that basically revolves around keeping up with the Joneses in society and not really living the reality and the structure of their own individual self. In short, they have no individuality, no personality. Everything they do is based on what others expect them to do, and it functions from others. As a result, we notice with adult children that adult children very many times get involved in addictive areas of their life, and adult children very basically are people that live in fear, guilt, and dependency. The three descriptions of the adult child are: people that are adult children either become isolators, fantasizers, or they become caretakers. Let's begin by speaking about the isolator. The isolator is the adult child who grows up in a dysfunctional family and has so much fear and so much guilt and so much dependency on that family. As that child grows up, that child very basically tries to find something to be secure and someplace to be loved in. This child usually grows up in a family where love may have been injury or harm, where love may have been addiction. So as a result, they have no concept or no area of love at all in their family. So as a result, when this child grows up, this child begins a quest or a journey. The journey this child takes, the isolator, is to find some place, something, or someone in which they can find security, find love, and find solace for the rest of their life. Some place to belong. Isolators are usually people who very basically hide primarily in institutions. Isolators very basically are very rigid people and very uptight people. They're individuals who, because of their fear and guilt, usually are attracted to places like fanatical religious organizations, cults. They're attracted very basically to organizations that have a lot of black and white rules and regulations and that never change. They're attracted to organizations that will give them answers to everything just so they don't have to figure them out for themselves. And so basically what happens is they get very comfortable being a little child. And they look for a mommy or a daddy, an institution, a person, or a place that will do everything for them, take care of them, and give them security. Very many of these children are very much attracted, these adult children, are very much attracted to organizations like the military. For in the military, again, they do not have to think. They very basically are told everything they do. And they are told, like by a mommy or a daddy, a DI, they are told very simply, this is how you function, this is what you will become. So you function in a very positive way. People like this also we find very basically in religious life. We see them in very many institutions that set up lifestyles for them. So then they can begin to fit into it. They are comfortable there, they survive there, and they don't have to think for themselves. The institution does it for them. Also, very many of isolators we find in our mental health systems. They get caught up in the mental health system in the sense of going in and out of psychiatric institutions because they are a nice place to be. They are comfortable. There is no responsibility. Someone else does it for them. As you'll see later on in this talk, isolators usually hook up with caretakers because they look for caretakers. They either make institutions their caretaker or they look for individuals who will take care of them and help them and guide them through life. In short, they do not want to experience independence or any concept of self. It's much more important to them that someone else do it for them. The second type of concept of the adult child is the fantasizer. The fantasizer, very basically growing up in a dysfunctional family, is a type of individual or child who does not want to admit, face, or deal with the reality of that family. And so as a result, the child becomes a fantasizer. The child makes believe. If you ask this child as a young child about his family or her family, they will very simply respond to you by telling you that they have the perfect family. Everything is great. Everything is wonderful. Being a school teacher, very many times I could pick this up in children in the sense that kids would describe their family to me and it was just unbelievable. It wasn't real. It was too perfect. And the reality is, this is what they want. They want everything to be perfect and okay because the child does not want to grow, does not want to experience any pain. It wants to have the perfect mommy and daddy to take care of everything for them. As this adult child grows into adulthood, they take their fantasies right into adulthood. As a result, they develop lifestyles that are based around fantasy. They develop lifestyles that are totally out of reality. They develop lifestyles that very basically live in what I call Disneyland. And what happens to these people is their lives become very unmanageable. They're always poor. They're always struggling. They're always hurting. They're always in trouble because they're always living outside of the reality of who they are. So they develop fantasy worlds, they live in those fantasy worlds, and they're scared to death of anybody or anything or any situation that will change that fantasy world. They love also to isolate fantasizers, so as a result, they are scared of pain, they are scared of struggle, and the bottom line is they are scared to death of any type of growth. When you deal with the fantasizer, you're dealing with someone who is totally out of reality. And one of the things that happens is, if you bring reality into their presence and you show them reality, they will fight you and battle you and make you into a victim. Fantasizers are always creating victims. They need victims to survive. The victims are the people who are trying to change their so-called real world, their fantasy world. And so as a result, everybody becomes their enemy. They're very paranoid, very scared, very afraid people. They operate in fear and they operate in guilt. And yet they're very dependent people because very basically they are dependent on their fantasies for survival. And yet their fantasies are not real. So as a result, their life is very unmanageable. They can't live in the reality of this world. Again, fantasizers are people who never grow up, never experience the growing up process. They are also very angry people. And yet they don't see the anger because they mask the anger through the fantasy. You never see what's really going on inside the fantasizer because the fantasizers always present to you their fantasy and their world. They are very grandiose people. There are people very many times who create situations that, again, even in business, that are not real. They live in this grandiosity, and their grandiosity creates unmanageability for them. Again, there are people like the isolator who live in image, live in fantasy, live out of reality. The third type of characteristic that comes from the adult child, a dysfunctional family, is the caretaker. And the caretaker probably fits the biggest role of all. The caretaker is the individual who, as he or she grows up in a dysfunctional family, is always trying to fix the dysfunctional family. They are the children, as they grow up, that are always trying to straighten out mommy and daddy. They're always trying to organize the family. They're always trying to make it okay. They want everything always to be happy, joyful, and fantastic. And so as a result, what happens with the caretaker will run around and fix everything, straighten it out some way. Got to make it work. Again, the caretaker doesn't want to see anybody experience any pain except themselves. Caretakers are martyrs. Caretakers are people that very basically take care of the whole entire world, and it's okay if they hurt, just so nobody else hurts. Caretakers are people, again, that are not real, but caretakers very basically run our society. Caretakers are individuals who do things for other people all the time, but never have a good self-esteem of self. So as a result, they never demand payment for what they do. They do everything for free. And very basically, caretakers are people that are what I call the social workers of the world. They take care of everybody, they save everybody. And many caretakers are fostered by very many of the isolators' religious fantasies, in the sense that we should be the servants of the world to everyone, but never take care of self. They have a very warped concept of their own self as a person. Caretakers are very angry people, very frustrated people. As a result, they have to straighten everything out so everything will be okay for them. They are also survivors. Caretakers love to hang around isolators and love to hang around fantasizers. They're always trying to change isolators and bring them out of their isolation and hiding. They're always trying to get fantasizers to look at reality, and yet at the same time, they can't look at it themselves. Interesting little aside when we talk about caretakers. Caretakers are people that are very fearful of getting in touch with their own personhood. They are also very guilty about not doing for other people. They always do for others. They are basically the saviors of the world. The savior complex comes into the whole area of the caretaker. Let's look at some of the caretakers in our society. If you search around our society and find many of the low-paying jobs, caretakers are people that work for social service agencies. They are clergymen, religious people. Caretakers are the nurses of the world. They are the very basic people who are working under somebody all the time and never assume the responsibility of their own self. They're always doing. They are social workers, welfare workers, nurses, some doctors, not all. Some individuals who are always doing things for other people. There are people that basically take care of others. In the field that I work in, we find very many therapists, very many counselors are also caretakers. It is the nature of caretaking that brings them to these professions. And that can be done in a very positive way if it's done in recovery. But unfortunately for many, it's done for their own self-esteem, and they develop a concept of not knowing who they are. Their identity comes not from who they are, but from what they do. If you ask the caretaker, who are you? They will say, I'm a doctor. I'm a nurse. I'm a social worker. I'm a professor. I'm a teacher. I'm something to that effect. And so what happens with a caretaker is the caretaker very basically picks up these roles and as a result begins to get into all kinds of trouble as a result of them. So when we talk about caretakers, we're talking about very many of the people in our society have a very difficult time really beginning to relate to other people, because what they are doing is doing for other people, not relating to them. And so what they do is caretakers are people that run around the countryside and try to make sure that everybody is happy all the time. They are people pleasers. They care for everybody, and therefore they want to make sure the world functions the way it's supposed to function without any trouble. And it's amazing. Caretakers hurt themselves a lot. You notice something about caretakers also. Caretakers usually develop some of the following addictions. Caretakers usually become either love addicts, and I'll explain that in a minute, or they become workaholics, or they develop eating disorders in their life. And I'll show you the concept of that in a few minutes. These three descriptions of the adult child, the isolator, the fantasizer, and the caretaker, are the roles they begin to play for their survival and for their functioning. The isolator and the fantasizer usually are people that eventually get involved in one type of addiction or another. The isolator and the fantasizer either become a drug addict or an alcoholic, or if they don't become either of those two things, they will become either a compulsive workaholic, a compulsive overeater, or they will become love addicts. And love addicts are basically people who develop sexual fantasies, develop sexual addictions, or basically become so dependent on somebody else that they can't live without them. They can't function without them, because they have to take care of that person and do for that person. And as a result, they also can never let go of them. So again, isolators and fantasizers very many times become addicts. Caretakers usually marry addicts. Caretakers are people that usually look around and search for some sort of an addict or somebody in their compulsiveness to marry. So therefore, they can spend the rest of their life taking care of them. They like that. That's how they function. If you are an isolator, a fantasizer, and a caretaker, if you fit all three categories, then you are an addict adult child. You have won the booby prize. You won the whole shooting match. The addict adult child is the toughest human being on the face of the earth to treat. The addict adult child fights treatment because you got to remember they're caretakers, so they do their own treatment. They don't follow direction too well. And what they do is they always try to solve their own problems and straighten things out for themselves. And as a result of that, they're always getting into more complications and more trouble. It's almost like they're bent on self-destruction. And so as a result of working with these types of people, working in a rehab, I see it all the time. I can tell the people that come into the rehab that are basically alcoholics and drug addicts. You can work with them pretty clearly. The ones that are addict adult children from dysfunctional families fight you tooth and nail from the minute they come into treatment. They battle you because they've got the answers. The only problem is the answers never work for them. So it's kind of interesting. So when we talk about these three concepts, we're talking about a whole new concept of addiction. How a dysfunctional family affects people because the adult child grows up developing these images, and in developing them, the adult child develops inside of himself a sense of the little child not wanting to grow. Let me show you what I mean. Some of the basic concepts of the adult child are that adult children, as they grow up, develop what we call normals. Now, the adult child does not know what normal is. The adult child, by nature, is someone whose normals are dysfunctionality, whose normals are the dysfunctional family, whose normals have become for them the way they experienced it within their family. So as a result, the adult child very basically grows up between the ages of 1 and 9, and whatever happens during that age bracket is how they live the rest of their life. Example in point. Very many times coming out of a very rigid school system, and let's say many of people who come out of the Catholic school system. As they come out of that system, we begin to realize that we develop certain norms as a child. As we begin to grow up, we still live by the norms we were taught as a child, the rules and regulations we were taught. We cannot bring those norms and develop them and change them into adulthood norms. So as a result, our normals are childish normals. We then begin living an adult life with the value systems of a child. And so as a result, our adult life becomes dysfunctional. As a result, our adult life becomes chaotic, becomes guilty, and becomes fearful. Because children are taught as children. Adults should be taught as adults. But very many times, adults never give themselves the opportunity to be taught as adults. They stay the little child. This is what I was taught in grammar school, and this is the way I have to live forever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever. By the way, that is the motto of the adult child, forever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever, because they are scared to change or make changes in the course of their life. A friend of mine once described the statues of the adult child, and I kind of picked this up and I said, someday I'm going to dedicate 2 statues to the adult child. The one description of the adult child is the begging dog. The dog sitting up on its hind legs with his 2 paws in the front of him, with his tongue hanging out saying, ah, take care of me. You are a nice doggy. I pat you on the head and I give you your reward because you do everything I tell you to do. You are trained properly. You function properly. You are a good clone. Another description of the adult child is the individual down on his knees in a praying position, a statue, with a pigeon flying over the top of his head. And the pigeon is dropping a few things on top of the adult child's head. Instead of the adult child getting up and moving, the adult child just simply leans his head back and looks at the pigeon in a more direct way. So he gets the crap dropped on him even more directly. We are people who never get out of the way of crap. We're always letting people dump their stuff on us. And as a result, we take it. And then we basically function with it because we think we can fix it for them, and we can't. We have to learn to allow people to have what belongs to them. As we look at the recovery process for the adult child needs very definitely to learn how to change their norms, change their equations. They have to learn to develop adult equations in life, adult rules and regulations for themselves. They have to learn that each and every day they grow up and they live, they can change the norms for that day. They can develop for that day. The adult child also has to learn to affirm his or herself, to begin to realize the positive side of them. The adult child has to learn to begin to see their goodness and their beauty, their individuality and their strength. So one of the processes we use for the adult child is a process called affirmation. For the adult child, we need to be able to say things like, I am a good, special person. I am intelligent and I am wonderful. Because so many of us have been programmed as children of negative things in our life. Remember when you were in grammar school? And you were told to go to the board and write 300 times, I am a bad boy. After you write it 300 times, you believe it. After all, it's programmed inside of you. Now we tell you to go to the board and write, I am a beautiful, special, wonderful person 300 times. If you keep doing that and affirming yourself, then you'll believe that too. So again, the process of recovery for the adult child is to begin to let go of the fear and let go of the guilt, to begin to let go of the dependencies and to begin to break out of the different areas of their life. So norms for the adult child are childish. They have to develop what we call adult norms. The adult child also has a very difficult time telling the truth, or as I say, making things clear. The adult child very many times is always used to covering up and hiding. So as a result, the adult child is always making stories up. The adult child is always telling things exaggerated. The adult child never tells the truth. They lie when they don't have to. The adult child is the individual who is always telling people things that aren't real because they're protecting people from reality at all times. As a result, they're scared of reality themselves. Now, I'm not saying they're lying directly or in a moral sense. This becomes a way of life for them, so they live this way. This exaggerated world, this grandiose world. The adult child has a very difficult time with any sense or concept of intimacy. The adult child does not even know the meaning of the word intimacy. Because again, the child has grown up with the concept that their body, their physical self, is something dirty or something terrible. And so as a result, they don't see the sense of intimacy even with their own self, their own personhood. So as a result, they also develop inside themselves a sense of what they consider to be intimacy, and in reality, it's not. The adult child has no norm or function for intimacy. They have grown up in families where intimacy was never talked about, never expressed, never shown. They've grown up in families where even sexuality was considered to be something negative. So they have no concept of their own sexuality either. So very normally what happens to the adult child as they grow up and get into relationships, we see very many studies done where the adult child very basically usually marries either their mother or their father. And what happens is they come out of a dysfunctional family. As they grow up, they need to find a new dysfunctional family or create it so then they can fix that and straighten that out. So as a result, what happens a lot of times is they then begin to grow up and they look for mates and for people that are dysfunctional so that they can fix them and take care of them. The isolators and fantasizers keep looking for mates that will fix them and take care of them. And so as a result, we have a lot of people who at a very young age get married and think they're in very positive marriages and relationships, but as a result, they end up abusing each other, hurting each other, and draining each other to death because they are not having a relationship on an adult level. They are on an adult child or child-child level. Very many times these relationships are what I call pre-adolescent relationships. As a result, they function in their families and households in the function of pre-adolescence. Their intimacy is very negative. Their sexuality is very negative. They have no concept of bonding or closeness or being intimate with each other because their intimacy does not come from the emotional or the spiritual. It only comes from the physical. And as we know, the physical can only function for a while. After a period of time, the physical dies. If the physical does not have behind it the emotional and the spiritual, the beautiful sense of love, as we spoke in the talk before this. I think it's so important for us to realize that the intimacy level for adult children is almost zero. As a result, they are in marriages that have very negative and bad sexual relationships. They are in marriages where sex becomes something they avoid and run away from. They develop marriages where any sense of closeness or intimacy tends to be avoided or looked down on. And so as a result, to the outside world, they appear okay. Because adult children always give that beautiful appearance on the outside. The inside just isn't working. And yet they can't face it or deal with it because they are survivors. They have to keep surviving. The adult children have a very difficult time making major decisions in their life. They have a difficult time making major decisions because they depend on the approval and the affirmation of other people. They wait for other people to tell them that it's okay to do what they have to do. They sit back and they wait and they wait and they wait. I've always said that adult children are always people that are always in waiting. They're the bridesmaids of the world. They never become the bride Because very simply, they're waiting for everybody to come on board and everybody to accept it and everybody to say that it's okay. Then they will do it. Now, we all know some of the basic realities of life. That day will never come, that everybody will say it's okay. It's not going to happen. Because as we know, some people will, some people won't, and some people won't even comment on it. And that's the reality of it too. And so the approval and affirmation is another big issue. Adult children do not get on with their own lives. So they have to learn how to get on with their own lives. They have to learn to become risky and take chances. They have to learn the adventure and the glow of life. It's scary because they will experience much pain and struggle in doing this. Because very basically, adult children are people that are hostages. They allow themselves to be taken hostage and they take hostage. You see, what happens to very many adult children is they have so much fear and so much guilt inside of them that as a result, they can't move on, develop, or go in beautiful, healthy directions in their life. One of the things we have to teach adult children, and it's hard to do it, is to teach them to learn to eliminate the words right and wrong from their life and develop the concept of healthy and unhealthy. And very many adult children know the healthy decisions they have to make. And yet when they make those decisions, they suffer for them and they pay for them. Because basically they are usually around individuals and people who will not approve of their decision. And so as a result, they become scared, upset, and as a result, very many times they try to run from that decision. The recovery process for the adult child and the intimacy and the approval and affirmation level is to begin to reach out, risk, take chances, and to begin to develop a sense of developing your own self-approval. It means validating of self. To begin to look at yourself and see a sense of your own individual personality. To begin to look at your own norms and set up your own rules for life. To begin to become responsible for your own norms and rules of life. To begin to look at the directions you want to go in life and walk them. And not be afraid, even though you are afraid. Again, it's another contradiction, I know it. But the fear now is that you can walk them. You can make decisions that are healthy for your life. It means that as you do this, there are a lot of people who will not approve of your decisions. They will make comments to you like, I don't know what has happened to you. You were such a nice, wonderful person at one time. Now look what you're doing. Look how you're messing everything up for everybody else. And yet, if you get into recovery, you realize you can't mess everything up for everybody else unless they want it messed up. You're not responsible for somebody else's life, but you are responsible for your own. That's a very hard concept for us to get into our mind because we are too busy making sure that everybody else is okay with what we do and how we do it. Recovery means that you're going to get criticized. You're going to get talked about. A friend of mine once said that if you're talked about, it means you're in recovery because it means you're making good decisions for your life. Another characteristic of the adult child is that the adult child is either super responsible or super irresponsible, which means that basically they have no checks and balances. Everything they do is exaggerated, is to an extreme. They operate in the extremes of the world. Of course, both these areas create unmanageability and they create problems in life. The adult child has to learn how to develop a sense of healthy balance in their life. They have to learn to live within the reality of life and to develop a good, positive sense of reality. So the adult child, by being over-responsible, or the adult child by being irresponsible, either becomes a overprotector or the adult child becomes someone who doesn't care one way or the other. There's got to be a healthy balance of the two so growth can take place in them and in the people they're associated with. Case in point. One of the things that happens a lot of times with adult children is one of the sicknesses that we have in our society is being a professional mother or a professional father. Professional mothers are people that never relinquish being a mother. A kid can be 50 years old and they're still their kid. It's still my son. I'm still taking care of them. I'm still doing things for them. I'm still organizing their life. I don't want them to get hurt, so I watch them and protect them. We see this very often in families where mothers are very much overprotective or fathers are overprotective. That's because they're scared to lose and relinquish their role as mother or father and not allow the kids to move on and to grow. We see this very many times in dysfunctional families where maybe the children live either with a mother or with a father, then choose to switch that role and live with the other. It's like we're scared to let go of that role and let them go out and struggle and develop the things they have to develop in their life, because we want to make sure things are super okay, and then maybe they'll become super not okay. So we got to be careful with that. Balance means let the process work and it takes care of itself. People are scared to allow that to happen in life. We do that for our own selfish means because we're scared to relinquish our roles. If you relinquish a role you have in life, then it means you got to create a new role, a new development, and a new personhood, and learn new things for yourself. It means adventure. It means going out there. It means being different. Again, adult children don't like to be different. They like to fit the mold. They like to be part of society. Another characteristic of the adult child is they're scared to death to be different. And yet, if you look at real good, healthy spirituality, what is real good, healthy spirituality? It means to be different. It means to be an individual. It means to be your own person. It means to stand on your own 2 feet. It means to stand for what you believe in. That's called spirituality. And yet the adult child is scared of that because they're too worried about what the neighbors think of them. They're too scared to experience a sense of their own personhood and do things the way they feel they should be done. I mean, look at the houses of adult children. They're always perfect. They're never lived in. They're never human. You never experience in the house of an adult child anything that's wrong. They begin to realize that for things not to function right, for things to be a little bit upset, might be kind of a normal way of life. It's a growing way of life. Because people then learn and they grow and they learn how to develop things in their own life too. We're scared of that. Adult children also are very loyal to people who do not deserve their loyalty. They are extremely loyal to people who don't deserve their loyalty. They're loyal even in the face of people who ignore them totally. It's almost like they have these unwritten laws. These are people in my life I have to be loyal to because I'm dependent on them. And I'm so dependent on them, I'm scared to death not to be loyal to them because maybe they will abandon me. See, adult children are scared to be abandoned. They have been abandoned for a good part of their life, so they're scared to be abandoned. They find anybody who pays attention to them, anybody who cares about them, and as a result, they are scared to death to lose them. That's why they want them all for themselves. Adult children are very possessive people. As a result, they are scared to death to share a person in their life with somebody else. They are scared of the thing called unconditional love. They're scared of it because if someone else comes into their life, then that person may not be with them anymore. And unfortunately, what happens a lot of times is they become very possessive, very jealous, and very angry. And as a result, they chase the other person away. Beginning to realize that you can share other people and share the people you love. And let them have other people in their life too. It's scary for the adult child. Because everything they do is put into one egg in one basket. Everything they do is based around one person. And again, they have to learn that life is bigger than that. It's a much bigger scene. They have to open themselves up to something much bigger than that. Recovery in that level is they need to be able to give themselves permission to criticize people that they love. They need to give themselves permission to be able to say to people that they love, you're wrong. I don't agree with you. What you're doing is not right. They need permission to do this. And it's scary because very many children will not allow themselves permission to criticize someone in their family. That's why it's interesting when you do studies of the adult child. Very many times the dysfunctional person in the family is the one who is never told that they are dysfunctional. It's usually the stable parent or the stable partner that takes all the heat. It's almost like children as they're growing up are able to yell, scream, and even go after the stable parent because they know they won't be abandoned. They know it. Even though they themselves may abandon that parent, they'll come back because they know they won't be abandoned by him no matter what happens. It's almost like we do this ourselves. People that are stable in our life, we beat them up. People that are stable in our life, we are really hard on. Do you ever notice when you really love somebody, how sometimes you're really hard on them? You make life miserable for them sometimes? And that's okay too. But you do it because you know the love is there, because you feel safe and secure, and you know that they won't abandon you. And what happens a lot of times in that situation is we realize that that person becomes a very important person in our life. So a real love relationship means I can be whatever I need to be. I can even be angry at you one day and I know you're not going to run away. We can have the greatest disagreement in the whole world and we'll still be okay because we're not afraid of abandoning each other. When you operate through those fears and those guilts, then you always have to be nice. You always have to cover up. You always have to hide. You always have to do these things so the other person doesn't get upset. That's what happens a lot of times in dysfunctional families. A dysfunctional family member, very basically, cannot criticize the other family member. It's like one of the traits of the adult child is that we are always creating victims. Victims are very important people for the adult child. A victim is somebody or something we can blame. Let me show what I mean. Adult children love to join religious organizations that set up rules and regulations for them. They join them, they are loyal to them, but they will sit down with people at a diner and criticize those organizations to death. Criticize the rules to death, but won't do anything to make changes in it. And the next Sunday, be right back in the same church again. But all week long, gripe and complain about it. See the philosophy? An adult child wants to belong to somebody who makes rules and regulations for them. Then if they don't like them, they can blame them for them and not deal with it themselves. There's no personal responsibility there. See, it's their fault. This one does this, that one does that. It's always easier to blame somebody else than look at your own issues. So adult children are always avoiding their issues, creating victims and blaming other people. As long as they have victims, they can keep functioning. They have to look at themselves, reality, or the truth. It's much easier to have somebody else to take it out on, scapegoating. Again, for recovery, we have to learn to let go of our victims. We have to learn to make peace with our victims. We have to learn to begin this process of healthy recovery. To begin to realize that these victims no longer exist. They're not real. The real issue is us. And the real issue is I got to look at myself and begin to realize that I can make changes and make decisions for me in my life. And that's extremely important. Again, it means assuming responsibility for your own life. It means growing. It means becoming an adult. It means going through the process of recovery. Let me share with you, just in closing, some of the more important characteristics and ways in which we do treatment for the adult child, and suggestions I can make to you to begin to break out of some of these syndromes that I was talking about today. Probably the most important way is for us to begin to reconstruct our childhood. See, one of the things you have to understand is you may have had a bad childhood. So what? If you had a bad childhood, you had a bad childhood. It doesn't mean you have to have a bad adulthood. That's entirely your choice. I can do one of two things. I can look at my childhood and I can go over it and 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 be on a self-pity pot and feel sorry for myself and do this and do that and sit there for the rest of my life. Or I can look at it and say, how can I learn from that? How can I go back and get all my needs met? See, I have needs, and so do you. And each of us can get our own needs met. We have a right to have our needs met in life, and we have a right to go after them, which means that I can now begin to set up norms, rules for my life that I am comfortable with. I can set up people I want to share my life with that I am comfortable with. I can now begin to set up my own boundaries that I am comfortable with. And it means that I can begin to look for my own happiness with those I want to be comfortable with. They are my choices in life. I no longer have to be a martyr. I no longer have to be the suffering servant for the rest of my life. I have to realize that I have a right to happiness. And I can't live my life so somebody else can be happy. That's the greatest disservice I can do to myself in my life. And if I do that, then I'm being dishonest to myself. And so as a result of growth, I can learn that I can begin to validate my own existence. I am somebody. I'm somebody very special. I can validate me. I can give myself self-validation. Don't wait for somebody else to do it. Please, do it for yourself. You deserve it. Another way of doing that is to develop what we call the affirmation process. Learning to affirm yourself. Learning to look at yourself from a positive perspective, from a positive point of view. Learning to search out and go for all those things that are beautiful and healthy in your life. Realizing that, yes, there's a negative part of me, but I can take that negative part, learn from it, grow from it, and discover my positive self. I have so many beautiful things inside of me. In adult child recovery, we call that freeing the magical child within. In all of us, there's another person, the free, spontaneous, beautiful individual. We have to free that person. It means letting go of the shackles and all the things that keep us from being that person. Opening up our life and letting it grow. It's scary sometimes, but also very beautiful. Again, each individual person has a right to do with their life what they want to, and nobody can make them do anything else. There are choices people have in life. Let people have their choices, and you make your choices. If they happen to coincide, beautiful, fine, wonderful. If they don't, that's okay too. Wish them luck wherever they go and whatever they do. The best for them. Another beautiful process of recovery for the adult child is learning how to play, learning how to celebrate who you are, learning how to let go and try new things in your life, learning to go back and do many of the things you never were giving yourself permission to do because you're always scared and afraid. Get over your fears. Fear is a myth. Fear does not exist. It is the greatest myth in our society. Yet so many of us are buried in it for so long a period of time. Fear is only fear. When you face it, when you deal with it, it goes away. It's interesting, isn't it? Guilt is a myth too. Guilt is a myth that is created by very many institutions, by very many people for survival. Realize that guilt is okay. But remember, you don't have to be guilty. You are innocent, you are beautiful, and you are special. Look at yourself in a very special way. If you make mistakes, admit to them, learn from them, and grow. Did you ever see people that can never forgive anybody for a mistake they made? As a result, they are always uptight inside themselves all the time. We have to learn to forgive ourselves, forgive others, heal, move on, let go. It's extremely important. Adult children have to learn to develop what we call a positive inventory of their own life. They have to learn to develop a beautiful sense of their own personal love and realize that they are somebody very special. And that means, again, validating themselves. Become an individual. You see, the basic recovery process for the adult child is to become an adult. Now watch how it happens. The adult child begins in pre-adolescence. The first stage of recovery is to become an adolescent. Becoming an adolescent means you go out there and do all the things you always wanted to do in life and couldn't do. You go out and go for it. You go out and play. You may do a lot of secret, crazy things. You may do a lot of things people consider insane. You do all kinds of crazy things like adolescents do. So many of us, even parents, are scared to death to let their kids become adolescents because it means they're going to do crazy things. That's what adolescents are supposed to do. It's a growing process. From that comes maturity. So very many of us are still adolescents. I laugh sometimes when we talk about the adolescent age bracket between 13 and 19. It's not. Some of us don't reach adolescence until we're in our 30s and 40s. Some of us in our 50s. And that's reality too. Whenever you have to reach it. Go for your adolescence. Enjoy it. Go for all the things you need in your life. You only have one life. Live it. Live it as an adult. But let the magical child play within you, but don't let the child control you. It's a big difference between the two. So I guess I'm going to close by simply saying that anyone who lives in fear, guilt, and dependency has an obligation and has a right to let go of that fear, to let go of the guilt, and to become independent. Good, healthy spirituality means good, healthy independence. Good, healthy spirituality means that you are able to enjoy who you are, to experience the gift of you, to be open to all the growth within you. My hope for all of you, as it is for myself, that each of us will allow that child within to become an adult so it can become a child again. And this time a child of our own choice, a magical child, a playing child, a celebrating child. Sure, life is tough. Life will always be tough. If you don't leave time to play, to celebrate, to enjoy, time for yourself, you get stuck in the tough. Remember, you can deal with the tough if you make time for yourself and you break away from it. Don't get stuck in it all the time. So I hope that this talk helped you to begin to realize how many of us are dysfunctional. In fact, I'm willing to say 99% of us are. That's okay. Because our dysfunctionality creates our functionality. Isn't it neat to be able to experience your dysfunctionality so that someday you can begin to create your own functionality that's yours and belongs to you, and you are comfortable with it, and it's what you want in your life? And then live with it, enjoy it, and be responsible for it. That's called maturity, that's called living, and that's called being functional in a world very many times that is dysfunctional itself. Thank you, and God bless you.